Wings and Brothers by Lycan Wingbat. A Batman All Media Types fanfic, rated for general audiences, with additional tags for Alternative Universe Soulmates, Alternative Universe Wings, Platonic Soulmates Jason Todd and Duke Thomas. Jason Todd has trust issues, Fluff, Cuddling and Snuggling, Platonic Cuddling, Light Angst, Good Sibling Duke Thomas. Duke Thomas is a ray of sunshine. Jason Todd tries to be a good sibling. Preening, Platonic Soulmates, Trust-Based Soul Bonds, and Wing Grooming. Summary. Duke checks on Jason after he gets stabbed, and ends up with a lot more than he bargained for. Duke disengaged the traps by the window. Jason had been stabbed a week ago, and it was Duke's turn to do a life check. So here he was, up way too early, crawling through a crime lord's window. "Jason?" Duke yelled. He didn't particularly care if Jason was sleeping or not. Jason had missed his check-in, which meant Duke was up 4 hours earlier than usual. All because Bruce was in a brooding tizzy. The kind where he locked himself in the cave, obsessively checking the trackers and soul bonds he had on the rest of the flock. Except Jason, of course. Normally, Bruce would calm down after an hour or two. But this time? Jason had switched safe houses after Bruce barged in 4 days ago, responding to a false distress beacon. Jason had ditched his phone and all his trackers after that. Come on, man. Would it kill you to check in with Bruce? He's brooding. Again. Duke trudged further into the apartment, stopping in front of what he assumed was Jason's bedroom. He wasn't sure, so he knocked loudly. "I'm fine, Narrows," came Jason's muffled shout. "Go away." "Well, Bruce wants pictures as proof you're alive and kicking," Duke says, and then adds, "and to make sure that you're not hiding an infection, like last time." A suspicious pause. Duke sighs. "You're hiding an infection, aren't you?" "No." Jason's answer did not sound confident in the slightest. Duke uses his X-ray vision as he picked the lock. "Jason, why are you on the floor?" "I'm not on..." Duke had picked the lock in record time. "Hey!" Jason was in a heap on the floor on his stomach. But that wasn't what caught Duke's eyes. It was Jason's large, black and dusty red Lammergeier wings, more disheveled than Duke had ever seen. The feathers clumped awkwardly, some oily, others dry. It reminded Duke of when he had found his parents. Their wings had been worse, but the neglect of Jason's feathers was the same. Jason was uncharacteristically quiet, and doing his best to not look at Duke. He was probably embarrassed. So Duke did his best not to make a big deal of it. Jason could feel Duke's gaze on his wings. If he'd remembered to call Bruce and remembered to get a new burner phone, then maybe he wouldn't be in this situation. It was mortifying. He had just finished an exhausting post-nightmare shower, trying to keep his wings out of the water because he didn't have the mobility to dry them afterwards. Was almost as taxing as he thought it'd be. And, in the end, he'd only put on a pair of sweatpants. He had clipped his right wing on the door when he was walking out of the ensuite bathroom, and lost his balance. He had been trying to find the energy to crawl into bed when Duke had come knocking. "Do you need a hand?" Duke asked, like he was offering to help with dishes, not carrying Jason to his bed like a child. Jason swallowed his spit, and his pride. He was too wrung out to protest. "Yeah." Duke walked over and helped Jason sit up, careful not to disturb his wings. "Where do you want to go?" Duke asked, without an ounce of judgment. Jason couldn't help but feel relieved it wasn't Bruce or Dick who had come to check on him. Bruce would have gotten that constipated look he got when Jason was around. Dick would have looked at him like he was a ghost, and he wouldn't have been able to hide the pity in his eyes. Duke was so calm and didn't make a fuss. He asked what Jason wanted, instead of just dragging him into the cave, then the manor, which would have put everyone in an uncomfortable position. In the depths of Jason's mind, he'd admit that he still loved Bruce. But it was hard to trust the Bats after everything that had happened, with all the hostility between them. The scar on his neck smarted in remembrance. It was better now. It was the best his relationship with them had been since he had come back, in fact. But the bats didn't trust him, and Jason didn't trust them. He didn't feel comfortable being vulnerable with them anymore. He couldn't. Not when they could wake up one day and decide that he had crossed too many lines, that it wasn't worth it to be allies, and lock him up. So he didn't kill anymore, not in Gotham at least. But Duke didn't know him before or after, and he didn't have a broken bond with him. He only knew Jason as he was now. "The bed," Jason finally answered. "Please." Duke grabbed Jason's arms and hoisted him up, and Jason let out a startled grunt as he tipped into Duke, who also grunted when Jason's full weight crashed into him. "Dude, what do you eat?" Jason just huffed. Duke promptly dumped Jason onto the bed before heading to the bathroom. Jason didn't even have the chance to ask Duke what he was doing when Duke came back to where Jason was sitting with a first aid kit. "Can I?" He gestured to Jason's stab wound. Jason blinked before shrugging. He could have protested, saying that he could tend to his wounds on his own, but he was exhausted, and given how Duke had found him, Jason suspected he'd receive a look. Duke started checking the wound. "So, you don't have an infection, and your stitches look okay." "I did tell you," Jason grumbled. "You did, and you were on the floor. So, forgive me if I was skeptical," he teased. Jason rolled his eyes, but couldn't help the small smile that spread over his face. He got lost in thought as Duke went through the motions of cleaning and rewrapping the wound. It was familiar. Jason had been in this position more times than he could count, though not with Duke specifically. It didn't take long. Duke had worked quickly and neatly. More quickly and neatly than anything Jason could attempt right now. But the swallow, at least, that's what Jason thought he was. But Duke's wings were a blinding shade of yellow, so he couldn't be certain, was looking at Jason with a weird, almost undecided expression. Jason pulled his legs up to his chest, resting his forearms on top of his knees. Do you want you don't have... Duke stopped and took a breath, and said, "I could help you preen your wings if you like." Jason stared at Duke, surprised. His wings tensed without his input. Preening was something you shared with people you trusted. Wings were delicate. A break in the right place would render you flightless for the rest of your life. He could still feel the way his wings broke under the Joker's hands. No one had preened his wings since before he clawed his way out of his grave. Duke should have kept his big mouth shut. Things had been going well. He'd been on track to go back to the manor and get 2.5 hours of much-needed sleep. But no, his heart was too big, and he just had to open his mouth, leaving him in one of the top 10 most awkward moments of his life. Jason hadn't said anything yet, and Duke wanted to crawl into a hole and stay there for a week. "You don't have to say yes," he blurted out. Jason's vivid green irises stared at Duke, examining him. Duke was sure he'd say no, that he was stepping over a boundary, and that Jason would kick him out. Jason looked away, turning his gaze to the clock on his bedside table. "It'd take a long time, Sunbeam. Besides, I'm pretty sure you have more important things to do today." "I'm not doing anything important today," Duke said, sending Bruce a wave of annoyance through their bond in response to the man's nagging for an update. "Don't you have school?" "It's Saturday. Something you'd know if you hadn't ditched your phone to hide from Bruce." Duke teased, and then said softly, "I don't mind, really." Because he didn't. He knew what it was like to not be able to preen your wings properly. Jason looked at him skeptically. "You don't have anything better to do?" Duke shook his head. "Nah, just a few reports that I'm putting off. And a lovely morning of sleeping in. But that ship had already sailed." He closed his bond with Bruce after sending him a cocktail of annoyance and reassurance through it. Jason still looked uncertain. "You can owe me one," Duke offered. "Okay." Jason relented. Duke gave Jason a warm grin. "Where do you keep your preening supplies?" After getting everything he needed, Duke sat crisscross behind Jason, the bed sinking slightly under his weight, and began gently picking out loose feathers, tossing them into the trash can he'd gotten from the kitchen, while brushing crooked feathers to lay where they were supposed to. Jason's chin came to rest on his forearms, his wings relaxing into Duke's fingers as he ran them like a comb through the soft down of the black feathers at the base of Jason's wings, carefully removing the occasional keratin sheath. "Is this okay?" Duke asked softly, almost whispering, unwilling to risk breaking the lax atmosphere that had settled over them. Jason hummed, nodding slightly. Duke hasn't ever seen Jason this relaxed. Sure, they had shared the occasional joke, and they'd worked on 1 or 2 cases together, but Jason's guard was practically non-existent right now. Jason couldn't remember the last time someone had preened his wings for him. The last time someone had offered had been back when he was living at the manor. Bruce had asked him if he wanted to be preened the day after he'd benched Jason from being Robin. Preening always made Jason feel better, especially after a fight, but he hadn't wanted to be placated. A small part of Jason wished he had just let Bruce preen him. He knew someone had preened him while he was catatonic in the League, but that had been the same as a nurse preening a patient in a coma. It wasn't the same as consciously choosing to let someone preen your wings. Bruce hadn't offered to preen Jason since he had come back. Despite the tentative truce between them, he knew it was because he wasn't part of the flock anymore. But a part of him still ached for that closeness and trust. Duke used a towel to dry feathers that Jason had gotten wet in the shower. He ached for the soul bond that had been severed when he died. But after the heads in the duffel bag, Jason doubted he'd ever be allowed back into the flock, even if he found a way to get his bonds back. He doubted it would ever be possible to get his soul bonds back, considering they could only be activated when both parties trusted each other. Duke distributed the oil from the base of Jason's wings, gently massaging it through his feathers. His careful preening satisfied an itch that had been bothering Jason for the last 6 months. He hadn't had the time to preen like he normally did, and his only saving grace had been that he didn't molt in the traditional sense. His wings only lost and replaced a few feathers a year, completing a molt only once every 2 years. Duke had moved to Jason's flight feathers, combing through them to lay properly along his vulture wings. He forced himself not to tense when Duke pulled his wings back so he could access the wrist of Jason's wing. Jason succeeded for the most part, but he couldn't stop his wing from twitching a little. And if it weren't for the fact that Duke was holding his wing, Jason knew he wouldn't have noticed, but the other vigilante paused. "I can stop if you want," Duke asked hesitantly. "I'm almost done anyways." Jason shook his head. He knew Duke wouldn't hurt him. Blinding white flashed in his vision, the same white that came when you hit your head, and something snapped into place inside his chest. An overwhelming wave of warmth and emotion that weren't his own flashed over Jason, flooding his every sense. Wonder, surprise, and bewilderment danced in his sternum like fireflies. Jason felt like he was going to pass out. This was not at all how he felt when he and Bruce had bonded. And, after so much silence, these emotions were too loud, too bold for him to handle. Duke, because it had to be Duke, felt so strongly, so passionately. The only thing Duke could see was the warm light of the soul bond. It filled the majority of his vision, a string of gold light so bright it almost burned his eyes. His powers allowed him to see the bonds between people. Granted, they had to be in the same room, and Duke had to be concentrating very hard, but still. Duke quickly became aware of the emotions that weren't his own. The dull, distant quality of emotions made clear. They were Jason's, disbelief and confusion filling his end of the soul bond. Jason nearly fell forward, and Duke reacted on pure instinct, catching him before he went over the edge of the bed, and pulling Jason close into a sort of hug, careful to not squish his wings. Jason's head lolled back onto Duke's shoulder, the sound of his panting breath filling Duke's ears. "This is fine, totally fine," Duke thought. He breathed in deeply through his nose, and out through his mouth, trying not to pant as well. Once his breathing was under control, he pulled at the bond, gradually lessening its flow, like a dam on a river. Jason's breathing slowed a bit. "Thanks," he mumbled. They sat there, trying to get used to each other as their souls latched onto one another and weaved a bond that would stretch but never break. Unless one of them died, or all the trust between them was lost. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Jason reached out to Duke through the bond. And Duke met him halfway. The disbelief and confusion had faded, replaced with a tentative joy that Duke couldn't help but soak in. Jason tried to sit up, grunting in effort, but Duke just turned him around, careful not to disturb stitches, and pulled him back into a hug. One that was much more comfortable. Duke sent a calm reassurance through the bond, and Jason relented, resting his cheek on Duke's shoulder. It took a while for their souls to settle, but once they did, Duke opened the bond more and more, until their emotions flowed easily between them. "So, when did you start trusting me, sunshine?" Jason asked, his tone teasing. But through the bond, Duke could practically taste the nerves dripping off the question. "Do you remember about 7 months back when we accidentally busted the same warehouse, and we made that temporary alliance?" "That long?" Jason couldn't wrap his head around it. Had Duke trusted him back then, when no one had any reason to? "Sorry for making you wait 7 months. "Hey, you had years of paranoia to work through, so I don't mind," Duke reassured him. Jason couldn't help but marvel at how easily Duke had put him at ease. And despite being an absolute menace, the daytime vigilante had once taken every second screw out of the wing cycle to mess with Dick, and had successfully blamed it on Damien. If that didn't warrant the title of menace, Jason didn't know what did. When he wanted to be, Duke was the most emotionally intelligent of the bats. "You're too good for me, sunshine." Duke's arms tightened around Jason. "Says who?" he says, sharply. His readiness to defend Jason poured through their bond. When last had someone been this ready to defend him? He wanted to grab Duke and shake him until he realized that Jason would, intentionally or not, hurt him one day. Jason wanted to shake him until Duke realized that he shouldn't trust him. "I'm gonna hurt you," Jason whispered into Duke's collarbone, his voice filled with grief for something that hadn't even happened yet. "And I'm gonna hurt you. Comes with being human." Duke's stubbornness burned in Jason's chest. "But I'm not letting you push me away for something that hasn't happened." Every ounce of protectiveness and love Duke had for him wormed its way into every part of Jason's heart. "So you just have to live with the fact that you're my brother now." Jason twisted out of Duke's hold, grabbing him by the shoulders and hugging him. His stitches pulled slightly, but weren't torn. "What the—" Duke's sentence was cut off by his face being squished into Jason's chest, and being wrapped into Jason's arms and wings. "I think you have the roles reversed, baby bat," Jason said smugly. "You're gonna have to live with the fact that I'm your brother, and all the caveats that come with that." Duke's sarcastic retort was a muffled, "Oh yeah?" "Really?" Duke could practically picture the smug smile on Jason's face. "Like, the fact that I'm the older brother." Duke's annoyance rang through the bond, feeling like a chick huffing about needing to stay inside the nest. But underneath that was a fondness that Jason latched onto like a dying man. Duke's annoyance disappeared at the action. "Go to sleep, sunshine," Jason said, shifting to lie on his back. "I'm not tired," Duke grumbled, despite sinking deeper into Jason's embrace. "He's so frickin' comfy, it's unfair," Duke thought to himself. Jason tried to remember how Bruce had gotten him to sleep when he was still Robin. Tried to remember the warmth and love and safety that had once flooded their bond. He scraped together every bit of softness he could muster, and pushed it into Duke. Duke could physically feel how a thick blanket of love and all-encompassing protectiveness settled over him, crawling under his skin and making a home underneath his ribs. Sleepiness sank its claws into Duke, and he didn't try to fight it. He knew that his soul brother was never going to let him go. And if, for some reason, Jason did let him go, Duke would punch him. Hard. Jason could feel Duke give in to the sweet allure of sleep, his emotions quieting to a mere whisper. He, however, tried to stay up, his paranoia reminding him to stay awake to protect Duke. But, in the end, Jason couldn't resist the Bond's urge to sleep with his soul brother. Notes. I love them so much. The rest of the notes section is a plug for their Tumblr, so go read their Tumblr. They post fic updates, and a request to leave comments, regardless of what they are.